For nearly 50 years, one part of Elvis Presley's home was deliberately kept out of reach, not forgotten, not overlooked, sealed, while millions of fans walked the halls of Graceland, stood beneath the chandeliers, admired the jungle room, and paid their respects at the meditation garden. There was a space above it all that no one was meant to see, a place left untouched since the final chapter of his life. When that attic was finally opened after 48 years, it didn't reveal souvenirs or harmless clutter. It revealed traces of a man the public never knew, frozen in time, carrying questions that never found answers. And once you understand what was found up there, the story of Elvis Presley no longer feels complete in the way it once did. The attic of Elvis Presley's Graceland estate was locked, secured, and left untouched from the day he died in 1977. No cameras, no tours, no official explanations. Even family members rarely acknowledged that it existed. For decades, it remained a sealed space above one of the most famous homes in America, protected by silence as much as by locks. Then, in 2025, after 48 years of speculation, archivists were finally allowed to breach what many insiders quietly referred to as the Forbidden Zone. What they found wasn't just surprising. It reframed the final chapter of Elvis Presley's life. The discovery raised questions not only about what had been hidden, but why the estate went to such extraordinary lengths to keep it hidden for so long. The mystery was never just about objects. It was about intention, about what was deemed too personal, too fragile, or too dangerous to be exposed to the public version of Elvis that the world had learned to worship. Graceland, with its columned facade and sprawling grounds, has been preserved like a time capsule since Elvis's sudden death on August 16, 1977. Every year, hundreds of thousands of visitors walk through the mansion's main floor and basement, marveling at rooms that appear frozen in time. The jungle room, the mirrored staircase, the meditation garden, everything carefully maintained to reflect the life Elvis left behind. Everything, except one space. The attic stretched across nearly the entire footprint of the mansion. Yet it was never part of the tour. According to a former Graceland tour manager, staff were not merely told it was off, they were instructed never to mention it at all. If guests asked about upper floors or storage areas, guides were trained to redirect the conversation immediately. The official explanation was simple. There was nothing of interest up there, but the security measures told a very different story. Unlike other private areas of the estate that were simply left unstaffed during tours, the attic entrance was physically sealed. Multiple locks, alarm systems, and according to several maintenance workers, the door was reinforced and nailed shut from the inside shortly after Elvis's death. This wasn't casual privacy. It was deliberate containment. A Memphis historian later pointed out how unusual this decision was. After Elvis died, the estate documented and preserved almost everything. Cars, jumpsuits, personal letters, even half-empty bottles of cologne. Preservation was the guiding principle. So why would an entire section of the house be sealed and treated as if it didn't exist? That question lingered for decades, fueling quiet speculation behind the scenes. Whispers circulated among members of Elvis's inner circle, particularly those known as the Memphis Mafia, the friends and confidants who shared his private life. One of Elvis's closest friends, Jerry Schilling, once told a journalist in the early 1990s that some spaces hold memories better left undisturbed. When pressed to explain what he meant, he abruptly ended the interview. The comment only deepened the mystery. Equally telling was the silence from the Presley family. Elvis's father, Vernon, who lived at Graceland until his death in 1979, reportedly refused to go near the attic during his final years. Priscilla Presley, despite being instrumental in transforming Graceland into a public landmark, never publicly assigned any significance to the attic in interviews. And Lisa Marie Presley, who inherited the estate on her 25th birthday, maintained the strict no-access policy throughout her life. According to a celebrity estate attorney familiar with the property, there was an unspoken agreement among everyone connected to Graceland. Whatever was up there, a decision had been made at the highest levels to leave it undisturbed, not postponed, not delayed, permanently untouched. And that decision, more than anything else, is what made the attic such a powerful symbol. Because when something is hidden for nearly half a century, it's not because it lacks meaning. It's because its meaning was considered too great to expose. That kind of coordinated silence doesn't exist without a reason. For years, the mystery faded from public view. By the early 2000s, the attic had become little more than a rumor, occasionally revived by tabloids chasing stories of hidden treasures or dark secrets, but never supported by evidence. Without proof, the speculation remained dismissed as sensationalism. The attic became Graceland's unspoken boundary, acknowledged only by omission, a restricted section no one referenced directly. Yet everyone understood was off-limits. Everything changed in January 2023 with the sudden death of Lisa Marie Presley. Her passing at just 54 shocked the world. But it also triggered a chain of legal and administrative consequences that no one had anticipated. Lisa Marie had been the final gatekeeper of her father's legacy, the one who honored long-standing decisions without ever explaining them. With her gone, unresolved questions about the estate surfaced immediately. including whether every part of Graceland had truly been accounted for, questions that could no longer be deferred. A family biographer later explained that whatever existed in the attic had remained sealed out of respect for earlier choices. But once Lisa Marie was no longer there to uphold those boundaries, the estate entered unfamiliar territory. Legal responsibility demanded clarity, and clarity required access. For the first time in nearly half a century, the sealed space above Graceland was no longer protected by silence alone. The situation quickly escalated into a legal matter, while Graceland itself would pass to Lisa Marie's children, including Riley Keough. The management of Elvis Presley Enterprises and the oversight of the broader legacy became entangled in a complex web of trusts, executives, and corporate authority. In high-profile estates with ongoing revenue and historical significance, complete inventories are not optional. They are required, not only of physical property, but of unreleased material, documents, recordings, and anything that could carry cultural or commercial value. That requirement set the stage for a decision that had been avoided for decades: court filings in Shelby County, Tennessee later revealed that Riley Keough formally petitioned for a comprehensive inventory of all Graceland properties, explicitly including areas that had previously been sealed or restricted. The request immediately met resistance. Priscilla Presley objected, arguing that certain spaces within Graceland had been closed in accordance with Elvis Presley's expressed wishes and should remain undisturbed. Elvis Presley Enterprises echoed that position, requesting that historically sensitive areas designated as permanently private be excluded from any inspection. What followed was a quiet legal struggle. Largely shielded from public view, court records were sealed, statements were limited, and the proceedings unfolded away from headlines, fueled by concern over what might be uncovered. According to a legal clerk involved in the case, the anxiety surrounding the attic was palpable. This wasn't about cataloging old furniture or forgotten keepsakes. There was real concern that whatever remained up there could complicate, or even alter, the public understanding of Elvis Presley himself. Some argued the space should remain sealed forever. Others believed the truth, whatever it was, belonged to history. The stalemate ended in January 2025 when Judge Raymond Torres issued a decisive ruling. His order stated that no space within a managed estate could remain permanently exempt from legal inventory, regardless of past practices or family preference. Privacy, the court acknowledged, had limits when weighed against lawful estate administration. With that ruling, the attic of Graceland was finally ordered to be opened. A small, carefully selected team was assembled. 2 court-appointed archivists experienced in historical preservation, a representative from Elvis Presley Enterprises, Riley Keough, representing the Presley family, and a court officer tasked with ensuring every step was documented. After 48 years of silence, the door that had remained closed since 1977 was about to be unlocked. The physical act of unsealing the attic turned out to be far more complex than anyone expected. According to preservation specialists consulted for the process, this was never just a locked door. Over the decades, multiple security systems had been installed, upgraded, then partially forgotten. The entrance had been reinforced with additional framing, and evidence suggested that sometime in the late 1970s, the original door was replaced with a steel core security door more commonly used in commercial buildings than private homes. The excess alone raised questions. This level of protection went far beyond simple privacy. It suggested intention and possibly urgency. Those measures only intensified speculation about what waited on the other side. Was the attic merely a private storage space kept closed out of respect? Or was there something more consequential, something that explains nearly half a century of silence? On February 16, 2025, exactly 2 weeks after the court ruling, the team arrived at Graceland after public hours had ended. Armed with specialized tools and the original architectural blueprints, they prepared to enter a space untouched since the day Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. No one involved was prepared for what they were about to see. When the reinforced door finally opened, 2 things were immediately overwhelming. The first was the smell, stale air trapped for nearly 5 decades rushing outward. The second was the order. This was not a cluttered attic filled with forgotten boxes. It was a meticulously arranged room spanning nearly 1,200 square feet beneath the mansion's roofline. One archivist later described it as stepping into a time capsule. Nothing appeared disturbed. Nothing felt abandoned. It was as if someone had prepared the space carefully, then locked it with the expectation it would remain untouched. The contents revealed themselves in stages, each more unsettling than the last. The first category was audio recordings. Dozens of unmarked reel-to-reel tapes and cassettes were stored inside a climate-controlled cabinet that had been custom installed. These were not casual recordings. Most were labeled only with dates ranging from 1973 to just days before Elvis's death in 1977. 5 tapes carried a handwritten warning: "Private, do not duplicate." Handwriting experts later confirmed that the writing belonged to Elvis himself. The discovery alone was extraordinary. Elvis was not known for keeping journals or recording personal reflections. The existence of hours of private audio from his final years could fundamentally alter how those years are understood. Even more disturbing was what came next. A locked medicine cabinet contained an extensive collection of pharmaceutical bottles, some prescribed, others unmarked, all carefully organized, unlike the chaotic assortment of medications discovered elsewhere in the house after his death. These were categorized with handwritten notes detailing effects, dosages, and dates. Nearby, a leather-bound journal appeared to track usage patterns and physical responses to different combinations. Medical historians reviewing the inventory noted that this wasn't hoarding or neglect. It was documentation, methodical, deliberate, and analytical. It suggested someone was actively trying to understand or manage what was happening to their body, a stark contrast to the narrative of unchecked chaos that has followed Elvis for decades. The third category was perhaps the most personally revealing: correspondence. Several boxes held hundreds of letters, many still sealed in their original envelopes. While full contents have not been publicly released, sources familiar with the inventory confirmed extensive communication with celebrities, political figures, and spiritual advisors, some of whom had never been publicly linked to Elvis before. These were not fan letters. They were conversations, private exchanges that hinted at a man searching for meaning, guidance, and control during the most isolated period of his life. Taken together, the attic did not reveal madness or neglect. It revealed preparation, awareness, and a version of Elvis Presley far more deliberate and introspective than the one history has settled on. The question no longer became what was hidden up there, but why so much effort had been made to ensure no one ever saw it. The most striking discovery sat in plain sight: a sealed envelope placed carefully on a small writing desk, marked in Elvis's own handwriting, "To be opened after my death." That single line has generated more speculation than almost anything else found in the attic. While the letter's full contents remain private, those who were allowed to read it describe it as deeply personal, addressed not only to family, but to the people who followed him all his life. According to sources close to the inventory process, the letter makes it clear that Elvis was acutely aware of his declining health and deeply concerned about how history would remember him. It was not a suicide note. It was something quieter and more unsettling. A man who sensed the end approaching and wanted at least some control over the story that would follow. But the most visually shocking discovery, the one that sent chills through everyone present, stood at the very center of the room. A life-sized mannequin seated in an ornate chair, dressed in a custom-made jumpsuit never seen in any public performance. Positioned facing the door, it created an immediate sense of unease, as if the room itself was meant to confront whoever entered. Witnesses described the figure as posed, preserved, almost ceremonial. The jumpsuit was white, detailed with blue and gold embellishments, one Elvis had commissioned but never worn on stage. Even more unsettling was the precision. The hair was styled to match his exact pattern. His jewelry was in place. His sunglasses were positioned exactly the way he wore them. It didn't feel decorative. It felt intentional. That surrounding the mannequin was what could only be described as a shrine-like arrangement. Personal objects from different periods of his life. Photographs spanning from childhood to his final years. Religious items reflecting a deeply layered spiritual life that blended Christianity with explorations of other faiths and metaphysical ideas. A religious studies expert later noted that this was not a tribute room built for nostalgia. It was a private space for reflection, constructed with patterns seen in certain meditation practices. A place where Elvis appeared to be confronting different versions of himself, separate from the public image that had consumed him. The final and perhaps most revealing discovery came in the form of journals dating back to 1973. Their tone grew increasingly introspective, and at times, deeply troubling. While the full entries have not been released, sources familiar with the material confirm they document a growing sense of entrapment within his own persona, mounting conflicts with his manager over career control, and complex spiritual and philosophical reflections that stand in stark contrast to the simplified image often presented to the public. One entry from June 1977 reportedly reads, "The person they come to see doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. I've built a mask so perfect, I can't take it off without tearing away my own face." As word of these discoveries slowly leaked, they forced a fundamental reassessment of who Elvis Presley really was behind the carefully preserved legend. The attic did not reveal chaos or madness. It revealed awareness, preparation, a man wrestling with identity, faith, control, and legacy in private, while the world consumed a simpler version of him. And as historians, fans, and cultural analysts continue to debate what this hidden time capsule truly represents, one thing is now impossible to ignore. The Elvis left behind in that sealed attic was far more complex, self-aware, and human than the image history allowed him to be. The most grounded interpretation is also the most human. The attic appears to have functioned as Elvis Presley's private sanctuary, a place where he could confront parts of himself that had no room in the image the world demanded. The spiritual objects, the journals, and the carefully organized documentation of medication use point to someone searching for understanding, not hiding recklessness. It shows a man trying to make sense of who he was becoming beneath the caricature he had been reduced to in the public eye. By the 1970s, Elvis Presley was trapped in a role he could never step out of. Experts later described it as an impossible psychological position. He was expected to perform a version of himself that no longer matched his inner reality. According to those familiar with the journals, Elvis repeatedly described the attic as the only place where he could exist without performing, without monitoring himself through the lens of expectation. In his own words, it was the only place where he could be himself without watching himself be himself. The attic wasn't escapism, it was containment, a space where he could exist as a person rather than a product. Another interpretation, more controversial but increasingly difficult to ignore, centers on the pharmaceutical records found in the room. Medical specialists who have reviewed the available descriptions argue that the methodical tracking of medications and their effects doesn't resemble chaotic abuse. It resembles experimentation born of desperation, someone trying to manage symptoms that weren't being properly diagnosed or treated. The note suggests patterns, timing, cause and effect. This wasn't someone losing control, it was someone trying to regain it when conventional treatment failed. Adding to that tension are the 5 cassette tapes marked private do not duplicate in Elvis's own handwriting, while their contents remain tightly controlled. Those familiar with the recordings describe them as confessional rather than performative. Elvis speaking not to an audience, but to someone unnamed, talking about fear, regret, the sense that his life had accelerated beyond his ability to steer it. These weren't rehearsals or business recordings. They were attempts to leave a trace of the man behind the myth. Taken together, the attic does not point to one single explanation. It points to complexity. A man deeply aware of his unraveling image, his failing health, and the widening distance between who he was and who he was allowed to be. The space wasn't built to shock the future. It was built to survive the present. And that may be the most haunting truth of all, according to reports. One tape includes a long tirade on Elvis Presley's infamously domineering manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis is said to have expressed in it how he felt compelled to continue some parts of his work despite his creative instincts because he felt trapped and blackmailed. This would be consistent with mounting historical evidence that suggests Parker, later identified as Andreas Vang, an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands, maintained control over Elvis through more intricate methods than previously thought. Peter Davidson, a music business historian, points out that if these recordings contain what sources say they do, it might drastically change how we perceive the connection between Elvis and Colonel. Elvis was a willing, if occasionally hesitant, participant in his career decisions, according to the narrative. A much darker relationship may be revealed by these tapes. The allegations that a partially burnt photograph was discovered in a sealed envelope within one of the notebooks are possibly the most unsettling. Sources close to the inventory team said that the image appears to depict an unidentified man inside Graceland in late August 1977, a few days after Elvis's official death date. Although the Presley estate has rejected this claim as reckless conjecture, it has stoked fringe speculations regarding Elvis Presley's death that were previously limited to the tabloid fringes. It wasn't a room dedicated to tributes. One individual with knowledge of the inventory process said, "It was a vault of secrets." The narrative that has been presented to the public for decades is entirely different from anything that takes place in that area. One thing has become more and more obvious as the contents of the attic are being examined behind closed doors. It's possible that the meticulously maintained image of Elvis Presley, which has survived for almost 50 years, is about to go through its biggest re-evaluation since his passing. The finale is now in sight. The dilemma of legacy. Beyond simple interest in a cultural icon, the discovery of Elvis Presley's hidden attic poses important considerations. Historians, relatives, and estate administrators must consider basic issues about presumed privacy, historical accuracy, and who will eventually possess a celebrity's legacy as they attempt to understand and possibly disseminate these discoveries. Why was the attic kept so secret? The most convincing answer is found in recently discovered letters from Elvis Presley's father, Vernon Presley, to the original Graceland estate managers in late 1977. Vernon reportedly gave the following instructions in a letter dated October 3, 1977. The upstairs rooms, and particularly the attic, are not to be part of any future tours or opened for any purpose without the unanimous consent of all family trustees. We should honor the son's demand for seclusion, which he treasured in life. This instruction and Lisa Marie Presley's lifetime dedication to safeguarding her father's private areas imply that respect rather than concealment was the original motivation behind the attic ceiling. Deeper worries about what the contents might disclose are alluded to by the extreme security procedures and total secrecy. Around its presence there is a fundamental tension at the heart of preserving any historical figure's legacy. Cultural historians have long argued over the same question. Do we honor a person's desire for privacy? Or do we accept that once someone becomes a defining cultural figure, parts of their life inevitably become part of the historical record? Elvis Presley did not belong only to his family. In a broader sense, he became woven into American cultural history itself. That tension has only intensified as details from the attic have slowly emerged. The private recordings, journals, and meticulously kept documentation of his medications offer something rare. They provide a window into Elvis's health struggles, his creative frustrations, and his inner philosophy during his final years. Yet sharing those materials would also mean crossing a line Elvis himself appeared to draw. Everything about the attic suggests intention. The labeling, the sealing, the care. It points to a man who wanted these thoughts preserved, but not exposed. The Presley estate now faces a decision unlike any it has confronted before. Initial statements indicate that a cautious and deliberate review is underway, with Riley Keough taking a leading role in determining what, if anything, will be shared with the public or academic researchers. In her only public comment on the matter, she emphasized that this was not about feeding curiosity. She stated that her grandfather created work that changed music forever, but he was also a human being who deserved privacy, and the goal is to honor both truths at once. Behind the scenes, industry insiders suggest the most difficult decision involves the audio recordings. Previously unheard Elvis material would generate enormous interest and could reveal artistic dimensions that have long been overshadowed by the spectacle of his public persona. At the same time, the recordings were explicitly marked as private, raising serious ethical questions about posthumous consent. Just because something can be shared does not mean it should be. Perhaps the most consequential question surrounds the journals and personal writings sources familiar with them describe in Elvis. Far more intellectually curious and spiritually complex than the simplified image history has preserved. These writings could fundamentally reshape scholarly understanding of Elvis Presley, not just as a performer, but as a thinker grappling with identity, faith, control, and meaning. They challenge the idea of Elvis as a fixed symbol and instead reveal a man still evolving, still questioning, even as the world refused to let him change. In the end, the attic did not just uncover hidden objects, it exposed an unresolved dilemma. How do we remember someone who belonged to the world, but never stopped trying to belong to himself? And where does respect end, and responsibility to history begin? If the journals contain what sources suggest, they reveal Elvis Presley as a far more sophisticated thinker than popular culture has allowed. A man wrestling with existential questions, identity, and his uneasy place in American life. That portrait stands in sharp contrast to the flattened caricature that has endured for decades, and it raises a question that now hangs over everything. What else remains unspoken, even after the attic was opened? That question grows louder because the public version of Elvis has always been carefully managed. Graceland, which draws hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, presents a curated narrative that celebrates musical genius and cultural impact while softening the most troubling parts of his final years. The content of the attic suggests a deeper complexity, one that doesn't fit neatly into that polished story. Not chaos, but conflict. Not excess, but searching. A man far more self-aware than the legend ever admitted. One former member of Elvis's inner circle, speaking anonymously, put it bluntly. Elvis was a complicated man trapped inside a simple image. What was found in that attic, he said, is only the beginning of who he really was. And that leaves the world with an uncomfortable choice. Do we want the real Elvis, with all the tension and contradiction that entails? Or do we prefer the legend that has been carefully preserved for us? The legacy of Elvis Presley, a man who reshaped American popular culture while becoming increasingly confined by his own iconography, may now be facing its most significant reassessment in nearly half a century. Whether that leads to a fuller understanding of the man behind the myth, or simply adds another layer to an already complex legend, remains uncertain. What is certain is this: a space sealed for 40-odd years has finally been opened, and with it comes questions that may never be fully answered about one of the most scrutinized, and yet most enigmatic figures in modern cultural history.